All right. Thank you to everyone for stopping by on Cyber Judo this week. This one is a continuation of one that we did a couple weeks ago, where we were talking about some of the basic fundamental features of Azure and Microsoft 365's cloud products from a security standpoint. And to this week is kind of a part two of that. So if you want to follow along from the Cyber Judo homepage, go right here to training content and videos. We can scroll right down here to the part two. And while we're looking at this, I just want to also call out that while we've got a lot of our training content on here with lots of different pages and reference guides and all those different aspects of it, we've actually got even more stuff that's on our YouTube channel. We've got 28 videos on here so far, going all the way back to last summer. Things from an initial look at setting up some social engineering, which we're going to be redoing here in a few weeks, utilizing ChatGPT for pen testing, reverse engineering a router, a couple parts of that, cybersecurity certification path. So lots of great content on there. Not every video has a Notion page, right? So not every video has a page on our website. So if there is a different topic that you're looking for, check them both out. And if you don't see one on there that you are looking for, just reach out to Christian and I, or Mike, or Dennis, or anyone else, and we'll see if we can't get it onto the calendar and get a good speaker to come and talk about it. So what we will do today is follow along on this. So if you have been working with Azure for a while, or you work in 365 all the time, this is probably going to be fairly basic for you. We want to take a look at the different components of their security suite from a pretty high level. And then as we continue the series throughout the year, we're going to drill down more into getting a lot more granular, a lot more specific on different aspects of it, like looking at identity. What does identity mean in Active Directory versus Azure Active Directory? How do those two things interact? How are identities protected in a lot more detail? Right, we're going to look at things like building a secure architecture in Azure, and how do you make sure your blobs are secure? That's binary large object storage. Hallman, you guys call it an S3 bucket over there, same thing. They're pretty much insecure by default. That's the kind of the policy. But so there's a lot more things that we're going to talk about there. But for this time, what we're going to do is really dig into Microsoft 365 Defender. What does that mean? What are all the different components of that? And then we'll look at a few of the other major security terms or features that you're going to hear about when you're digging into Microsoft's cloud products, like the Azure Firewall, network security groups, and we'll even touch base on Sentinel, as well as Microsoft Copilot at the end. But one thing we'll do just real quick is a quick 5-minute recap on some of the things that we talked about during the part one of this session. Unfortunately, that one didn't get recorded. Zoom was trolling me that day. So, but all of the content, I spruced it up on this page. It's you can follow along very easily, added a lot more references. So we're there. So what we did in that first session was we went through a couple of scenarios of how malicious actors can break into Office 365 environments, or into Azure, or anything like that. And then we looked at what are the different security safeguards that could be implemented on a very specific kind of specific feature component, like how that we were talking about, like user domain controls, versus this time we're going to be talking about Microsoft Defender for 365, which is where you would go to configure these controls. So if you do check out this page and you come all the way down here to the security features explained, it goes through one by one in all of them. You can use password best practices, using custom banned password lists, so not everybody can have Spring 2023 exclamation point. If you haven't seen one of those yet this year, you're not pen testing enough. They're definitely out there. We looked at other forms of MFA, like I really like, such as this one, which uses the additional context of geolocation, as well as a two-way swapping of codes, versus the more traditional SMS or push notification, which is very easy to bypass. You can bypass this too, but it's a lot trickier. That'll be a session for another time as well. We looked at things like legacy authentication, risky user detection. Again, all of these policies are things that I've seen in a lot of white box assessments of different cloud environments. People will have maybe some of them turned on, or forget about them, or not really understand that, you could have MFA, but if you allow legacy authentication and that authentication method doesn't support MFA, there may be a path into that environment without using MFA. Is that really bypassing it if you just have a screen door next to your gate? It's not really a bypass. So just a lot of those things can get really tightened up. And this first session was sort of a scatter shot of a lot of the features that I see people will either misconfigure, leave as default, or just ignore entirely. So with that, we're going to go to the part 2 of it right now, right here. So the first thing that we'll talk about is Microsoft 365 Defender. So what is that? It's a term that you're going to hear more and more and more since Microsoft switched to calling everything they have practically Microsoft 365. So that's like a little bit of Azure, you got Azure Identity Protection, you've got Office 365 apps, it's all kind of bundled into one. So Microsoft 365 Defender, if you ask Microsoft's documentation, is an XDR. It's Extended Detection and Response. And this is a very acronym heavy set of content here. So I did my best to either spell them out explicitly or link to either Microsoft's official documentation, which shouldn't change even if they change the names and stuff, or to link to some really, really good and free videos, either from John Savo, who I talk about all the time, and although he has no association with this at all, and I don't have any sponsored links, I just like that guy a lot, or some other good content creators, especially on YouTube, who dive into these things really well. So Microsoft 365 Defender isn't really one thing. It is a whole bunch of different features together that work in a holistic way to get your organization closer and closer and closer to what is referred to as a zero trust infrastructure, right? A zero trust principle, which is Microsoft's big word the last year or so. You've probably seen it all over the place. What does zero trust really mean? And it's got there's three components of that. Verifying everything explicitly. So it's essentially you don't trust anybody, right? You have to verify everything, and that'll be done with like Azure Identity Protection, which we're going to talk about. It might be done with in a way, it might be done with Defender for Identity as well if you have an on-premise environment. We'll talk about that. Using least privilege access, so that goes again with identity protection and conditional access policies, RBAC, role-based access control, all of that. And assuming the breach. So you have to always be continuously monitoring everything, because you can't ever kind of rest on your laurels and assume that even though you put all these things in place, you're good. So that's where it's going to really be integrating in a lot with Sentinel or any other security incident event management or security orchestration automated response. SOAR, I think so. So it's not one thing. You can use all Microsoft suites of products to achieve all of this, but you absolutely do not have to. There are alternatives for it. But I really like this diagram, and this is from Microsoft's documentation directly. And you can kind of see if the red dotted line here is telling you what is included in Microsoft Defender. You can see Defender for Identity, that's kind of on-premise infrastructure, traditional infrastructure, or infrastructure as a service, think servers, containers, that kind of thing. Defender for Cloud Apps, which is all of your apps that are like outside of Office 365. So that would be if you had AWS things, or if you were federating with, I don't know, Spotify. Maybe you figured out how to federate with Spotify. I couldn't think of one on the spot there. It didn't make a lot of sense, but federate with something else. Defender, data classification, data loss prevention controls, email security controls, all that stuff's in Defender 365. And then you have the Azure AD side of identity too, with Azure AD Identity Protection, Defender for Endpoint, which is sort of the anti-malware, antivirus kind of heuristics kind of a thing. So all those things sort of work together, and they work in a continuous fashion. So it's great if you have all these things in, siloed doing their own thing, right? It's really good that you've got your endpoints being monitored, and you got your infrastructure being monitored, and you got your email security solution being monitored. But you need to be able to have a holistic understanding of what the attack surface is, right? You need to be able to see what incidents are happening, and making sure those events are being elevated into incidents, and they can be triaged as need be. You also need to be able to understand where are the weaknesses and where are the vulnerabilities in the entire ecosystem. And that's where you're going to see something like Sentinel or another SIM or SOAR come into play, where it can take all of those different logs from all those different sensors and ingest that into a way that you're going to be able to action as a defender, or really understand when you're trying to get a grasp on the environment. So we're going to start off here with Defender for Endpoint. This is probably one of the easier ones to understand. It's an EDR, endpoint detection and response. I think if you've done any kind of security studying for like this, like that's a word that's going to come up in Security Plus. It's going to come up probably in Network Plus. It's going to come up everywhere, right? And it's your kind of your traditional antivirus, anti-malware for endpoints, but it also has the heuristics. So meaning even if you're not using specifically malware, it can be configured with varying degrees of sensitivity to try to determine if that user is doing something a little strange for that user to be doing. You can do some really crazy stuff with PowerShell. Is it strange that user even has access to PowerShell? Maybe. So it can take a look at what normal activity is for those endpoints over time and sort of adapt to identify when something really anomalous is going on. And usually you'll hear that referenced in terms of like elevating privilege, or if that all of a sudden this endpoint is trying to brute force other things on the network, that's really strange. And then you have your antivirus, anti-malware, things like picking up keyloggers, trying to shut down any reverse shells, that sort of a thing. So pretty straightforward there. One thing to be aware of, it's really made for Windows devices. You can get it to work on some other stuff, but there's usually some limitations, and it's usually a little bit of a struggle to do that. And things like compute workloads in AWS and GCP, that's just not going to happen. Even Microsoft's documentation basically says, don't even try, buddy. It's not going to work. So it's upfront about the limitations, but it is still quite common to see. Now, if you're fancy and you want to have an add-on to Defender for Endpoint, or if you have like a Azure P2 license or a E5 license and you've got endpoint, you can have an add-on for Defender for Vulnerability Management, which is pretty neat. It allows you to have a continuous monitoring view of that aspects of your security posture. And this is really not unlike what you would see if you use like Coda or anything else where you would be able to deploy a agent or a scanner in the environment, scan your assets, scan your cloud assets, continuously do that on a regular basis, get snapshots, understand your exposure, get a nice organized list of different vulnerabilities that it sees, and get some hints on that one. One thing I do like about the vulnerability management dashboard is you can really customize it very well to suit different things, whether you want to look at it from the lens of the MITRE ATT&CK framework, or if you want to look at it through some other controls. There's a lot of good options on there. And it is also really, really nice that you have one view here that includes, right here on the right, Microsoft Secure Score. So Secure Score is a pretty awesome feature. And it's usually, if I'm doing a white box cloud assessment of an Azure environment, it's one of the first things I'm going to do. So like order of operations is I'm going to look at their Azure AD, figure out how big it is, right? How many users do they have? I'm going to look at what their licensing is. Because if they're on like E3 licenses, I'm not going to recommend that they use all these features that are going to cost them, three times the amount of licensing fees, right? If they don't need that. So try to keep the recommendations within the licenses they have, or just, maybe an add-on here or there if it really warrants it. And then 3 is you look at Secure Score. So Secure Score is Defender's way of showing you where you got really, really big weaknesses. So if you had for example, an administrator account to your Azure environment who did not have MFA set up, that will be a flashing light in Secure Score, and it'll you need to go fix that. If you don't have legacy authentication blocked, it will tell you that. It will tell you that's a high risk. This is the link, and this is the button you need to press. Like, it really walks you through it very, very well. Other things like putting in DLP controls, data loss protection. Secure Score is kind of your best friend for doing a lot of that stuff. You can get the majority of the low-hanging fruit of assessing a Azure environment from Secure Score itself. And then you go in, then you go a little bit deeper and you start looking at different configurations and network security groups, that sort of thing. It also does a pretty good job of maintaining an inventory of different either certificates or applications. You can even do browser extensions on workstations, which is pretty interesting. It's definitely by no means the only tool that's out there to do this. And most organizations I work with do have a third party tool to do this. I don't know how popular this particular feature is, but it's there. It is out there. By the way, pretty much all of these things, you can set up a Azure account for yourself. Just portal.azure.com, create one for yourself. You get a $200 credit to use. You need a credit card, but they will load you up with a $200 credit. And then almost all these features have a 30-day free trial. So if you want to hop in there, you'll use up that credit before it charges you. I think it's good for, I don't know, 60 days or something like that, but you have the account for a full year. You can play with all these features, practice configuring them, do all that kind of a thing, and then just turn down the account when you're done. So that's a great way to do it. Because you can watch these videos, you can read the books all you want, but when you go in there and you just cannot find the single button that you need, it's so frustrating. And getting the hands-on practice is really, really important. So next one down the line is Microsoft Defender for 365. So this is a pretty big one, where there's a lot of features that go underutilized by organizations, but most organizations, at least most of the ones that I work with, do use Office 365 in some capacity. It's fairly ubiquitous. That, of course, is Outlook, email, Word, PowerPoint, Excel, Teams, all that kind of stuff. Right. And so Defender for Office 365 is really going to be centered around, really going to be centered around those applications, especially email controls. So this is where you're going to want to go in to configure your email controls, like your anti-phishing, your anti-spam, adjusting those. So if you're getting all kinds of stuff going to junk mail, maybe turn it down a little bit. Your anti-malware and anti-attachments. I'm sorry, not anti-attachments, safe attachments, where it will scan those attachments first, open it up in a sandbox, make sure nothing crazy is going to happen. Same with the links. Those are really good features. This is all in the anti-phishing one. This is also where you're going to be able to do impersonation controls. So domain impersonation, if you want to avoid all those typo squatted domains malicious actors are going to use from getting into users' inboxes, turn on your domain impersonation. It actually makes a really big difference. Same with user impersonation. You know, Dane is on the call. Our lead social engineer loves to impersonate people's like head of HR or their CTO or their CFO. Or what's even better is impersonating human resources and then having a fake version of their CEO on the CC and then replying to the phishing email as the fake CEO saying, yeah, this is legit. Make sure you guys do this, guys. That works really well too. So you wouldn't want to have everyone in your organization under user impersonation things. You can't, there is a limit for how many you can do. Off the top of my head, I don't remember what it is, but that would really be useful for your VIPs. You know, for your executive team, maybe even like some of your help desk people, because they're the ones who are going to call people up and tell them to download stuff on their computer or those kind of things. So I'm kind of getting the mindset of who would be a good target for impersonation for a malicious actor socially engineer, and that might be it. So it might not always be executive management. You might want to do some of your network engineers too. When we do our organizational reconnaissance, we're looking not only for the big dogs, but we also want to know who's going to pick up the phone if we call the help desk, right? Who would employees expect to receive an email telling them to go update their Citrix or update their MFA on Duo or that kind of thing. So something to consider. They also have preset security policies, which you can do, and that'll help you set it up really quickly. And you can kind of play with it. One thing you'll definitely want to do with configuring anything related to email security controls is kind of go slow and assess as you go along, because it's going to really piss people off in your organization if you walk in one day and you crank it up and then everything goes into the junk, everything goes into quarantine, nobody knows they're being emailed. Microsoft played with some settings this week, and that happened to us for a couple of days. They basically changed the weighting, the weighting on some of the policies for anti-spam, and we would have internal emails go to spam. Like I would get stuff in a long email chain from a customer. I would come in, like Blake on our team or someone would respond. I would never see Blake's, but I would get the response back. It was crazy. It happened. It's fixed now. You got to keep an eye out for that. But yeah, definitely out of nowhere, turning it up. Like it's actually on a numeric dial. I think it's from like 1 to 5 or something like that. If you turn it from 1 to 4, people are going to notice, right? So do things a little bit slowly. And a definite drawback of using those preset policies is you can't really fine tune it. The presets are the presets are the presets. So if you want to have that nuanced control, you want to be able to say like, we get a lot of emails from people who are reaching out to sales. I want the sales group to have their spam turned down a little bit lower because we want to make sure people can reach them. But we also want to make sure that the links people send them are really assessed. You can do that. You can make a group, put those users in that group, have their anti-spam control set a little bit lower, and make sure safe attachments and safe links are on for them. So you have that ability. It's not a one size fits all for your organization. And this is one of those options here. So you can see this is the preset policy. You can specify who it applies to or all. You don't get a lot more options than that, unfortunately. So I would definitely recommend maybe use a preset at first to see where you're getting more spam, where you're getting more junk coming in, and then using the other features to make your own policy based off of that to slowly ratchet up the protection till you hit that sweet spot between not inconveniencing everybody on your team, but also not opening yourself up to being socially engineered. That's tough. That's a tough gig to do. Like I mentioned, it's also impersonation protections in there. There you go. Protected custom users 350. I'm not sure if that goes up with licensing or not. I have never seen an organization put 350 people into impersonation control list because you know what? There's more than one Michael Hallman out there. And, you know, it could be legit.
God, let's hope not.
This video, by the way, is awesome. I don't remember his name off the top of my head. I think it's like 20 or 30 minutes long about actually going in and configuring all of these settings. Really good one. Defender for identity. Okay, this one is, it's easy to mix up with AADIP, Active Directory, Azure Active Directory Identity Protection. It's easy to mix up those two. They're different, kind of different in a way. They both deal with identities. Defender for identity, think on-premise. Think that those are your server environments. Those are the things that you want to have a sensor on that are doing normal network activity kind of thing. This is going to be heuristics based, so it's going to assess the identity controls, especially for domain controllers, and it's going to understand what is normal in your environment, what is not normal in your environment. It takes time to do that. We've definitely seen organizations that have had some of their domain controllers just don't have a sensor for Microsoft Defender for Identity. Some do, some don't. They just didn't catch that. That's something that secure scorecard should pick up, but sometimes it doesn't always. So making sure if you are using a solution like this, it's on all the assets. That's really, really important. Defender for cloud apps. This is an easy one in my mind to mix up with like Defender for Office 365, right? Because those are apps in the cloud, right? This means everything that's not that, right? So Microsoft calls it a cloud access security broker, and you're deploying nodes, you're deploying connectors via an API that's going to let you understand the security and configure the security settings of trusted cloud applications within your organization. So things that aren't covered by one of the other Defender products. So if you do have a lot of different integrations, this is going to be a really important way to not only be able to get insight into that, but it's also going to allow you to get the logs from those things. So imagine if you had like a Cisco Meraki environment or something like that, right? You would want to be able to understand not just, you don't want to have to look in that particular environment to see the logs for that environment, right? You want all of your logs filtered into one place. That way you can see patterns, you can see themes, you can see maybe this thing is getting hit a lot harder. Why is that? Do certain IPs, are they hitting all of our different stuff at once? Is there widespread like password spraying going on in different parts of the ecosystem? Maybe you want to have some automated responses to those things. Like when someone is doing some brute forcing, maybe you want to block by IP, maybe you want to block by geolocation. You can have orchestrated responses. When there is a suspected compromise, maybe a user was password sprayed and there was a login that was detected from someplace crazy. maybe you don't have a conditional access policy to block that, but maybe you have an orchestrated response to go in and close that session and then prompt that user to change their password in multi-factor authentication. Could be an option. But in order to be able to have the insight and to have those automated controls in place, you need to be able to ingest those logs. So this gives you the option to bring logs in from outside the Microsoft ecosystem into one place that can be actually actionable. And then we've got Azure Active Directory Identity Protection. So it's like Defender for Identity, but it's for Azure Active Directory, not on-premises Active Directory. Key difference. That is the key difference. Otherwise, very, very similar. It's going to try to automate and detect really strange things like someone using Tor to connect to their work computer. That's weird. That probably shouldn't be happening. Impossible travel again, malicious IPs, someone logging into your environment, even if it's a regular username and password, but their IP has been doing crazy stuff all over the place and it's been flagged by threat intelligence. That might be something that warrants an alert and a little bit of investigation. So it's for those kinds of things. Moving into Microsoft Sentinel, this is Microsoft's SIM and their SOAR, right? There are many, many others you can use, whether it be F7 inside IDR or whatever you want. And Microsoft's documentation is actually pretty good about helping you work and integrating other solutions in as well. I actually see more people using Rapid7 than Microsoft Sentinel. Personally, that's just from the organizations I've worked with. Statistically, I don't know which one is actually more popular, but this is the key to really getting a good understanding of the continuous realistic environment from a threat perspective, right? It's this very simple cycle. You collect all the logs from everything all the time. Using those logs with not only the general heuristics of what's normal in your environment, but also the constant flood of new threat intelligence from Microsoft or from whatever other security vendor is feeding into your SIM. Identifying what incidents need to be elevated into events, need to be elevated into alerts, triaging those alerts, providing the ability to investigate, determine if they're a false positive or maybe something is a false negative. And then if it's a SOAR where it can actually do automated response, determining what is the policy, what is the automated response we wanted to do. So just like we were just talking about a minute ago, password spraying, somebody gets in, close the session, make that guy change the password. Will it be a false positive sometimes? Maybe that guy, forgot to turn the VPN off on his phone and then he logged in to check his work email. Sure. Right. That might happen. But those are edge cases, right? That's not going to be the case every day, right? That's not going to be the case most of the time. But again, like we were talking about with Office 365 and especially those phishing policies, you want to be kind of careful in how high and how fast you turn up any kind of automated responses, because it's one thing to detect impossible travel and get the alerts, and then you can go and investigate it or reach out to those people and just like, hey, just wanted to confirm, are you on a cruise overseas right now? Yes, no? Oh, you are. Okay, but you're on Teams? All right, Christian, man, have a good night. That kind of a thing. So it's just a matter of having the right progression on these things. Going too hard, too fast is how people get frustrated with security.
Hey, Travis.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hey, real quick. I know during my time as a SOC intern for the 4 months that I had done, it was pre-COVID days. This Sentinel had just came out. It was like 2019, 2020ish, right? So one of the big things you were talking about was false positives. And at the time we were using Qualies, and I don't know if anybody in here or you particularly use Qualies, but Qualies is like a false positive king. It's all you get is false positives all the time. So the cool thing what Sentinel does is it does take a lot of those out of the equation, which is really nice. After you get rules set up, you can actually set those to where it's false positive. We know it's false positive, then it filters it out. Quality's not so much. So this one is one of the SIMs that I enjoy and have worked with. So
yeah, awesome. Appreciate you putting that in. And there's other like niche versions of this that you can integrate too. We actually had someone reach out to us about one that was by KnowBe4. Dan, do you recall what that one was called? It it was basically a SOAR functionality for email security controls. Do you recall, Dave?
Don't. I'm looking it up real quick.
Yeah, it was pretty neat. So it needed to be granted access to I think Office 365 or Exchange administrator role, right?
Oh,
It's going to have to, right? If it can automate a response, it has to have some level of permissions, and then it could actually, it kind of adjust those things in real time, which I thought was pretty neat. Anyway,
Yeah, I threw us a bit off topic there. Sorry.
no, that's fine. That's absolutely fine. So going into some of the other things, these are ones that I included them here because you'll see them come up a lot, especially if you're looking at doing like the AZ500, especially. Like when I wrote this one out, I kind of wrote it as like, if someone was gonna take the AZ500, this would be a good spot to go to get like the right links to the right documentation. So Azure Firewall is one of those things that's going to be included in it. And there's a couple different SKUs as there are with all of these. It's not like, you don't just have Office, Defender for 365, right? You have plan 1 or you have plan 2, or you have this add-on. It's like you got your car, but if you want a steering wheel, that's another grand, and it's a Tesla. So each tire you pay for individually, that kind of thing. So you have your standard one, and it's a fairly normal firewall function, right? Layer 3 to layer 7 is it's gonna check out. It is gonna be stateful by design, that type of thing. The basic one is an area where businesses can usually save a fair amount of money if they're using standard, but they're a small business. The small business SKU is actually made for the small business ones. It's just like how we were looking at the first week with like a E3 enterprise E3 license versus the Microsoft for Business, right? The business one is actually cheaper, gives you more features, but there's the limits on how many people, how on the size of your organization that can do it. I think it's 300 or 350 or 500 or something like that. So the basic SKU doesn't necessarily mean basic as in super bad. It's really just meant for smaller organizations. It's very similar in capability with standard. The limitations on it are limited in terms of how much data you can throw through it, because it's supposed to be scaled to an organization of generally your size. But it's not totally unusual to see small organizations have a standard firewall, and if they're not coming anywhere close to the scalability on it that they need, it's usually a nice thing to just turn that licensing cost down a little bit.
There's a cool bit here too that you mentioned with the layer 3 to layer 7 firewall, the standard built in. It's, as you and I know, network firewalls, they work on layer 3 and 4, but application firewalls like WAFs, right? They operate at layer 7, so that it makes me kind of think, is this must do web application firewall as well, since it's acting on layer 7, which is pretty cool feature to have, especially for companies that can't afford, WAFs, things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And then the premium one just comes with a couple more bells and whistles by including like an IDS and an IPS as well. There's this one here by John Saville. This goes into a really good look at taking a look at different ways that you can organize the deployment, like where specifically in your infrastructure you would want to have these deployed on. He goes through the hub and spoke model of where you would want to do basically have a central VNet covered by the firewall and do peering into the other VNets as you want. That's a little bit beyond what we're going to talk about tonight. We will definitely get there when we talk about how to set up the infrastructure when we get into probably parts 4 or 5 of this series as we go throughout this year. And network security groups is another topic that you'll hear quite a bit. It sounds pretty similar to like exactly how a firewall works, in that it's a way to create rules that define what actions are and are not allowed for IPs and ports and all those different protocols and all those things. So you set it up in a way that's very similar to the way you would set up the firewall, but they're really intended to be used together, not one or the other. And Microsoft's pretty clear about that. There are actually a lot of things that we can talk about doing the network security groups that may actually end up being an entire cyber judo session in and of itself. I think maybe it will actually be the next one in this series. That's a topic that is actually pretty important to understand. It just requires a little bit more of a fundamental networking understanding than necessarily some of these other topics do. And next up, we have Security Copilot. So this is Microsoft's newest, latest, and greatest thing. You've probably seen some news on it, or perhaps you've seen people complaining on LinkedIn about how it's going to take all their jobs. And we'll see, right? So OpenAI, the ChatGPT bot, essentially, Microsoft has purchased that, or at least purchased a massive stake of that, and is integrating it all over the place, as pretty much everyone in big tech is integrating those kind of things all over the place. Microsoft Security Copilot is specifically for providing a functional chatbot that can answer nuanced security questions by training it on a huge amount of Microsoft security data and security threat intel and in their threat intelligence and all that thing. And there's a different version of Copilot that's been around for a little bit. I think it's just called Microsoft Copilot, and it's like supposed to like replace executive assistants, and it can help you like automate responding to emails, and it'll fix your grammar on your emails and all that kind of stuff. Kind of like that. But imagine your, cloud security engineers and your cloud security analysts using it. And I think in a lot of ways it can be a really, really helpful tool, right? Because it doesn't matter how long you've been doing Microsoft stuff, they change it so frequently that you're always going to be going back to the documentation to figure out, that thing that you did 3 months ago, how do I do it again? I don't know, all the buttons changed and now it's called Purview, not Compliance Center. Come on. I think it'll be a really big time saver on that one. I don't necessarily, personally, this is just speculation now, I don't personally think it's going to be really replacing any personnel needed for cloud setup or cloud administration, just from the perspective that it really takes a lot of nuance, like we talked about with the needing to understand the pulse of the organization and the risk appetite of the organization to know how fast and how hard you can crank up those security controls, right? Automating, changing any features like that might be a little bit more trust than I think a lot of people are going to have in it. Thank you, Dan, in the chat there. Yeah, know before Fisher is that email security kind of SOAR I was talking about there. Pretty neat. It was the first time I heard about that one this week. Watched a few of the videos and read some of the documentation on Copilot, and it was actually some really cool features that it was able to do that could definitely see being useful. Again, here it was able to take a quarter's worth of incidents and responses and boil it down into a couple of PowerPoint slides. That's a huge time saver. Love that. That's great. Reverse engineering a malicious script, so you don't have to have a Dennis on payroll. Maybe you can get someone cheaper than Dennis. Just kidding, of course. But that's nice. I mean, certainly you'd want to double check that work and all that, but if you needed something to be done, really quickly to get kind of an understanding of what a script you identified had done, that could be a really good way to do that. Diagramming the network, including security zones. Oh, it is not every day we deal with a client who's got like a really good network diagram of what their network looks like, even in the cloud, where it's objectively a lot easier to make one of those. So that's really, really cool. And even do some degree of analyzing individual incidents. I don't know exactly what Microsoft meant by that comparatively to what a SIM and SOAR already do. I don't know, sounds pretty similar. But Mike, Dennis, Honey Badge, I'm curious your thoughts on Copilot and how you think it could integrate well or not so well, maybe in the rest of the ecosystem that we just went over.
I think AI in itself right now is such a hot topic. It's just going to go all over the place. Like Chat GPT, we had this discussion.
Mostly hype?
Yeah,
hype?
I don't know, man. It's weird. Like even you can, like my wife, right? She's a teacher. She's a dean over at community college, right? So they're always on the lookout for people that fake papers, things like that. So I think if someone finds an interesting way of having AI reverse engineer a malicious script like in a correct way, like a Dennis could do, right? Like if it's that good, then I think we may have a problem on our hands, down the road. But we'll see. I don't know. I'm one of those skeptics. Like I see the double-edged sword of it. Like it's great, but then like I'm also like a little bit, oh crap, what's what's happening here?
If only there was like an integration with Defender for Endpoint that could tell people, hey, it's not okay to have admin as the password on all your stuff. That would really help enterprises. I mean, that would be a game changer. But that technology is just behind us. Dennis, what do you think, man?
I'm with I'm kind of with Michael here on this one actually. And the reason why I say that is because I know inherently these models are trained. I know that they can glean context in some situations, but generally they're trained on what they've seen, right? So I'm a little skeptical on the I guess the practical implementation of something like that to actually be sufficiently advanced. It would require it to be able to have a lot more contextual understanding than I think it currently has. So I don't think we're there yet. I think eventually it will definitely be much better. I have no doubt it's going to improve. I imagine within, at the most 10 years, at the very least, and more realistically, probably like 2 to 5, we should have really well worked out models. I think probably 5 is more realistic. I think we'll have very complex models that are able to do some of these things. I've just seen the rate of improvement because I remember when Stable Diffusion first came out, it was, it was crazy. Everybody loved Stable Diffusion. It was really awesome. And I remember I looked at it, I was like, wow, that's really neat. And I left it for like a month and I came back to it. And the whole landscape had changed. They had like 3 more models that had come out. They had, improvements. I remember it went from, training the Stable Diffusion models into making like LoRa sets to be able to actually like fine tune. So given the pace that this is all evolving, while I'm skeptical at first of its application right now, I feel that it's very quickly going to improve, and it may be practical eventually, but it will require a better contextual understanding of the situation. So,
Is that going to inherently require more people to adopt it, more organizations to adopt it, so they can get trained on more than just a set that organizations like Microsoft would feed it?
I think that the architecture may need slight tweaks, just because you can throw more. I mean, you can throw more situations at it in order for it to train itself better, and it'll cover more of those cases, and it may work fine if that's done. But I feel like there is a change to the way that it's being applied right now. So the architecture of the way these models function, I think, has to have some changes in order to better grasp the context. I don't know what that's going to be. If I knew what that was going to be, I'd do it myself. I'd be a AI data scientist of some kind. But that's my I guess take on it at a general level.
I'm inherently suspicious of anything that's doing an action for you in the security sense of it. Like if it's going to be a chatbot that provides advice to fix something, that's fine. But until the day comes when I can run even a commercial vulnerability scanner and not have it tell me there's an Apache Struts problem with an Nginx server, not have these super obvious false positives that don't make any sense. I'm not so sure that I would be too comfortable handing the keys over to too much automatic action. Like I think this is
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think at the time now it requires oversight. I do not trust. I've used it a little bit. I do not trust any output that it has. I read it like it is malicious on purpose, just because there is not like it can be off in my, like, even in suggestions these days, like if you ask like OpenAI for something, it can make suggestions that are almost fully correct and they seem correct, but they have some minor flaw associated with them that just ruins the whole suggestion. Like I said, you got to approach it almost like it's malicious at this moment until it gets sufficiently advanced to account for those issues. So yeah, I'm completely with you. I wouldn't hand it over to AI just yet. I think it has a little more to go at the very least.
There's a funny video that went viral about a couple of days ago. I saw it on LinkedIn. I wish I would have saved it, but it's a a security guard, right? And he's handing bread and water to a prisoner, and the bars are like this, like they're vertical, yeah. So he takes the bread and can't get it through, so he turns it right, and it goes through the bar just perfect. So it's like, oh, and then it says, Chat GPT on there learning, and then it takes the bowl of water, tries to do the same thing. But when it turns it sideways, all the water falls out of the bowl. But he still hands him the bowl and like, hey, I did it right. Here you go. So I think that's a simpler way of putting what Dennis was saying, like on a lower level technical scheme. So it's just not there yet.
You can't get a phishing email if everything goes to quarantine. All right. Well, with that, thank you everyone for coming up. This recording will be out in a couple of days. We'll make sure we share it on our YouTube page as well as add it to the bottom of this page as well. And if you have any feedback, feel free to reach out to Christian and I if you want to suggest any topics for the future, or if anyone on here wants to present on any topics in the future, we can certainly work with you on that. So if there's no other final questions, we can cut it here.